Every time school threats happen and it's on the news, it has parents concerned about these questions. How will my kids be safe? How can I make sure this doesn't happen again? In a minute, I'm going to tell you how you can prevent it from happening again. But first, 9 days ago, recent school threats have parents on the edge as they wonder what to do. Take a look at this.
The Oakland County Sheriff is putting out a stern warning tonight following a wave of school threats on social media. Ferndale Middle and high schools were forced to close today, as well as Clintondale community schools. 7 Action News reporter Alex Bozargian explains what was uncovered on an Instagram account.
Police do believe the student was acting alone, and now that they have that student in custody, they think it's safe to reopen the high school and the middle school. They're warning tonight, very stern, that if you make a threat like this, you could go to jail for up to 20 years.
My understanding is that there was a fake Instagram account created, and I know that that account followed my son briefly.
According to police, that Instagram account was run by a 16-year-old female student. In her post, she threatened to bring guns to Ferndale High School and even compiled a list of kids she would kill.
I knew all the kids on the list, so to speak, and they're good kids.
Christy Stoll has a son at the high school. She says all the kids on the list were his friends. Police say the girl who wrote it is now in custody.
I talked to my kids this evening, and they both feel better about knowing that someone was arrested and then it was a single person. It wasn't some group of kids or something like that where they could feel like maybe it would spiral out of control.
Threats have been rampant in school districts across Metro Detroit. Some cities like East Point are even considering an ordinance to charge perpetrators for the resources it takes to respond. Oakland County Sheriff Mike Bouchard took to Twitter today, hoping to reach the masses.
This community has been through far too much, real and otherwise, over the past months to ever accept this kind of behavior.
Parent Mindy Domke was in Lansing when she first got the alerts. She says in the past she's contacted Ferndale school officials when her own child mentioned he heard a threat.
And it's a hard line because you want your kids to come to you and talk to you about everything, but at the same time, you have to kind of make a judgment call and kind of decipher through what your kids are telling you to know what's important, what's not important.
Bouchard says his office is responding to at least one school threat every day. He says all of them are important and will be investigated.
We need you to be part of helping us keep you safe.
Once again, schools are back open tomorrow, and the district says they're beefing up police presence around the building just to be safe. They're also offering extra support to students who might need it. In Ferndale, I'm Alex Bozargian for 7 Action News.
Now imagine as a parent, you could be punished for your child's school threats. But could it really happen in Michigan? Take a look at this.
This is Charlie Langton, joins us now. Charlie, not only are these threats incredibly disruptive, they're scary, and it's just not good news for the kids and their futures if they do this.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it's really bad. I'll tell you what, just today alone, we've had threats in Taylor. In fact, the one in Taylor, some kid posted a picture of a gun and said that he was going to shoot the head off the principal. Of course, those schools in Taylor closed. Redford, out. South Lyon East High School, a lockdown because of a threat in the bathroom. And then South Lake School in St. Clair Shores, another threat. Well, Macomb County Prosecutor Pete Lucido, he's got an idea to end school threats, in part by making parents pay. Take a look.
Talk to your kids and said, don't you dare make me pay for something so stupid as this.
Macomb County Prosecutor Pete Lucido says he's prosecuted 50 school threats this year, a 50% increase from last year. And he's emphasizing now that students should call this number if they see a threat.
855-565-2729. Okay to say.
And what do you want for the students to do?
I want the students to call because they are the first line defense as it relates to their own class, their own selves.
But Lucido has a 1-2 punch to end school threats. First, have the students call the OK to say number. But next, make the parents pay for the criminal acts of their kids. If a kid makes makes a joke. They send something on social media, I'm going to blow up the school, whatever, and they get caught. You're telling me that the parents are going to pay?
You got it.
It could be thousands of dollars.
You know what? Tell your students right now, your children, you have an obligation to go ahead and take care of your kids, but you also have an obligation for those acts that go ahead and have consequences of paying back the cities, the townships, and the villages for all of this excess that other parents shouldn't be paying. It's your child. You have the responsibility. Make sure you do your job as a parent.
All right, so you could be charged with a number of crimes. The biggest one would be making a threat of terrorism. That is a 20-year felony. So,
Right.
I know
We were
talking about
discussing this, and this
Yeah.
is the problem that has been on the books for years. However, in this state, even if you try a child, charge them with this felony, we don't have any right now currently that's been taken to that level. That's all been plugged down. If you charge a child who has made a threat or makes a false threat, don't you think that's going to set an example for these other children who keep doing this? If they finally do this and take it to the level of punishment where really right now it deserves to be.
Well, so you're talking about maybe a 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old kid. So yes, if you want to go through the criminal system and have the criminal felony on the record, yes, I guess you can do that. Most times in the juvenile system, it's kind of a system where you want to teach them a lesson. It's not really a criminal per se. It's a system where you want to get help.
Sure.
And the family needs help. The parents need help. Everyone needs services they can give them. So maybe the kid needs counseling. Maybe the kid has to be told right from wrong. Maybe the kid does have to go to Children's Village in Oakland County for a couple of days or a couple of weeks or a couple of months.
But if you see your friend being charged with a 20-year felony and as an adult and possibly spending that time in bars, it might change your mind about
they
calling
usually
them.
charge them. They usually do charge, but then yes, they can plead down. They can go through the juvenile system. There's another thing. There's another thing Lucido wants to talk about. It's called the Hero Award. So a Hero Award is an award given to the school, not the kid that calls the number to report. It's to the school. So everything is anonymous, and I know that he wants to emphasize that. Something's got to be done. We had 4 today, and I know we had there's every day there's
Hitting
all
mom
3
and dad in
counties.
the pocketbook, Lucido said,
That's-
may actually
That's
start
tough.
getting people to start
But that's
thinking about
tough
it.
because some parents can't even pay for their kids' lunch. I mean,
know.
how can you do that?
Well,
That's a tough situation.
let's see how many convictions and how much they are going to be charged.
Something needs to be
We
done,
will
though.
see. Something's got to happen.
Sure.
Right.
Thanks, Charlie.
And something does need to be done. So what else can you do to prevent these threats from happening? There's a lot of threats happening as we speak because no one gets the message. And I have a lot to say about this. I'll give you my take when we return. Stay with us. Every time, every show, every episode, I do school threats. I talk about these. Nobody gets the message. So is it fair to punish the parents? Is it fair to punish the parents for not talking to their kids? I think it's fair. I'll explain to you why the parent has a responsibility. If you're a parent, your duty is to protect the child. You're required to give them a warm, dry, stable environment, nutrition, educational opportunities, and medical care. Your child doesn't need Xboxes, computers, cell phones, laptops, TVs, anything. Social media. He does not need anything. He needs a roof over his head, food, and water. What he also needs is a room with a bed, a pillow, and a blanket. That's it. He doesn't need lots of shirts. He needs 2 pairs of shirts, 1 pair of pants, 1 pair of shorts, 1 pair of socks, and 1 pair of shoes. You've got to tighten the child back to the nuts and bolts. What I would begin by doing is strip everything out of his room except a mattress. And you parents are saying, well, we tried everything. We tried talking to him. We tried talking to my child. I tried this, I tried that. The key word here is try. You try doing this. And the meaning to the words I try, it just basically means the definition of tried is having to attempt, test, or having been legally evaluated guilt and innocence. That's the key word here, tried. It just basically means attempted, tested, or have been legally evaluated for guilt or innocence. I mean, incidentally, parents, what you need to do is nip this in the butt. Do you want to pay for your child's school threats? I don't want to see parents going to jail for this stuff. If I were to see my kids go to jail over this, if one of my fans made a threat, and if it was my fault, I'd admit to it. And if they remember my fan club, I would immediately remove them from the fan club like that. Until they learn, hey, don't be doing this. This isn't a joke. You could be saying, well, I'm going to go blow up I'm going to go shoot the head off the principal, and then you make it as a joke, and then you don't have to pay it. No. This is the real deal here. We need to make this stop immediately. Parents, you need to monitor what your children post on social media every day. Not 2 days, not 2 weeks, not 3 weeks, not 1 month, 6 months, 6 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever. Every day. Every day. I would begin by installing software on the phone or on a computer. Do not put a computer in your child's room. No. Put it in the living room. Put it in the living room so you can make sure what your child is watching on YouTube or what they're posting. It's a safe bet. We've had sexual predators. We've had Chris Hansen's To Catch a Predator. And it taught us a great lesson. Not to talk to strangers. That's a smart way to do. But if they had a computer, that stranger could come in and they'd be violating the law. That's what To Catch a Predator was all about. Years ago when I talked about this, what I suggested to you guys, for two parents out there, was to have them watch an episode of To Catch a Predator. That way the children can learn. So is it fair we gotta make parents pay? Yes. I think it's a good idea. I think it's a real good idea because many reasons why. The parent has a duty and a responsibility of the child. You have parental rights. You can't terminate your parental rights. If you're a parent and you decide to have children, you have the responsibility. You have the responsibility and the duty to protect your child. If you don't do those things, you could end up in jail, and your child could end up in foster care. Jail, FC, foster care. Those are the two key points. Parents and children. Jail, foster care. Parents, jail. Children in the foster system. And do we need to scare kids straight? Absolutely. Like I said yesterday. Yesterday I said we need to scare kids straight, and that's exactly what we need to do. We need to really scare kids straight. Like I talked about, we need to put them in jail for during the school day so that they can get a taste of what it's like, and they can be all like, oh, they can say, okay, this is where I'm going to end up if I do this again. But now children are losing their freedom for alleged school threats. Let's take a look at this, and then we'll take a break.
You could go to Granger.com.
But we begin this evening with a rash of school threats across Metro Detroit today, leaving parents concerned and law enforcement frustrated. Thank you for joining us. I'm Glenda Lewis.
And I'm Dave Llewellyn. Those threats disrupting classes at Novi Middle, South Lake High School, South Lyon East High, and Taylor High. So far, none of these threats have been deemed credible.
The recent string of threats forcing prosecutors to speak out and take action.
Macomb County Prosecutor Peter Lucido says so far this year, his office has had almost 50 people charged with threats of violence against a school, staff member, or student.
7 Action News reporter Kim Russell has more on the consequences that can come with making a fake threat.
I'm at the Oakland County Courthouse where just today, juvenile court referees heard 2 separate cases where teens were facing charges because of threats against schools. I listened in on one of those cases so we could show you the consequences kids can face. This is Oakland County Juvenile Court referee David Bilson talking to a child who just spent the night at Oakland County's Children's Village, the juvenile jail. Investigators arrested the boy, who were not showing due to his age, yesterday after one of several threat investigations involving schools in Oakland County. Detectives and prosecutors described how the case caused fear, chaos, and forced the school to close pending the investigation. Referee Bilson, after hearing from the teen's parents, detectives, and attorneys, ordered the child remain locked up, detained at Children's Village, at least until his next court date, which is not yet scheduled. It is one of far too many such cases.
We are reviewing more on a weekly basis, so those students are walking away with criminal convictions, so it is no joke.
The charges are serious. Oakland County Prosecutor Karen McDonald says children who make threats against their school can be charged with state terrorism charges, a 20-year felony. After all, such threats are leaving students and parents in fear, as we heard from families in Ferndale after 2 days of threats this week.
Scared and nervous.
The hardest part is being concerned about your kids' safety. That's the hardest part.
I was just panicking, so I'm just glad everybody's okay.
We need our children to be safe in order for them to learn. You just heard from parents of children in the Ferndale School District. The teen charged with that threat appeared in court today. The hearing that I listened in on had to do with the threat in Pontiac. And as you heard, that teen lost his freedom for now. This is serious stuff. Authorities are asking parents to talk to their kids. In Pontiac, Kim Russell, 7 Action News.
Kim, thank you for that.
And this is no joke. You think terrorism is a joke? This isn't a joke. I take these very, very seriously under a microscope with a damn grain of salt. Parents, kids, listen. You need to hear me. You need to hear me. I've had it. I have had it up to here. You may think that making a threat is a joke. You may think that, oh, I'm going to go do this to the principal is a joke. You could be going to jail. You want to spend the rest of your life in jail? If you say no, then be a good citizen. Be a good role model and say, hey, you better not post that. I don't want to see my friend going to jail. It's against the law. And you really could go to jail for 20 years. Look at the state statutes. My advice for you parents out there, talk to your kids. Talk to them. Don't have their computers in their room on their cell phones. Do whatever needs to get done. Because I've had it up to here. It pisses me off. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to continue talking about it. And if I hear another threat happening in the Corpus Christi area, it's done. I've had it. This is some serious stuff. I've had it up to here. No more of this, okay? Kids, do not make these threats. I'm dead serious. And if I see a threat again, I'm coming at you hard. And if one of my fans made a threat, I would seriously screw the parents up. Real good. Real good. You need to hear me. I've had it up to here. I'm through. I'm done. Zilch. Zip. Zero. Nada. Done. That's it. I've had it. Pisses me off. And it makes me very angry. Imagine if something happened for 30 years ago and then you were afraid if you told your father that you'd be beaten up. Up next, you're going to hear an over 30-year-old story that happened where a coach molested a little boy, and he didn't tell his father until 30 years later. He wrote about it in a book. Stay with us. Every time I hear stories about secrets, not telling someone about it for years ago, it makes it feel like not telling about it last minute. But when I watched this story, it had to be a real good one. Imagine hiding a terrible secret that you've been molested by your coach, and you couldn't tell your father. You couldn't tell your father about that, otherwise you could be beaten up. The man you're about to meet, he told his father that secret, and what happened next would stun the whole town. Here's John Hockenberry.
48-year-old writer Richard Hoffman is a teacher, a poet, and a father. He is also a victim.
I couldn't bring it home. I couldn't allow it to be part of who I am.
You could forgive Richard Hoffman for wanting to blot out large chunks of his troubled life, the loss of his mother from cancer, his 2 brothers from muscular dystrophy.
I knew that the story that I had to tell was not merely my story.
This is a tragic story of a boy who couldn't forgive himself. Richard had his own terrible secret, a secret he was terrified to tell his parents. They didn't make it easy. Richard says his father beat him, made him want to run and hide. Throughout a childhood full of brutality, Richard kept the secret that he was the victim of a horrible crime, a crime committed by someone close to the family, someone trusted by everyone in the community.
There was a lot of anger, a lot of fury in the house, a lot of rage, as well there might be, at the hand that had been dealt to this family.
A bad hand dealt to the head of the household. Richard's father struggled to survive in the small working-class town of Allentown, Pennsylvania. Every time he thought he'd seen the worst, something else would happen to his family.
If I would have turned my back and walked away from that, God knows what would have happened then.
Did you ever think about it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, you think about it. You think, boy, it sure would be nice if I could just pack up here and get the hell out. But you can't.
I think my father made some heroic efforts to convince himself and all of us that we were normal, that this was the way of the world and we were just like all the families on TV.
But Richard knew the worst. With rage at his absent father and rage at the ugly secret he kept inside, Richard outwardly brought home the trophies for his brothers who were too sick to make the sports teams. Trophies to make his father proud. Football and Little League. All of Allentown loves sports. In this community, athletes, and especially their coaches, could do no wrong. Richard Hoffman learned the truth as a 10-year-old child.
Do you remember the first time you met Coach Feifel?
It seemed like everybody I knew was playing on that team. Everybody who was a good athlete was playing for his team.
A winning coach, John Feifel, everyone called him Tom. He was tough, with an ironclad power over his boys.
He would wear football spikes, and he'd come and stand on your stomach.
You're a 9-year-old kid with a Korean War veteran Little League coach who's hardening your stomach by standing on it in a pair of football spikes.
Well,
that's America, teaching you how to be tough.
Yeah, well, teaching you what it means to be a man.
Lessons on manhood from a coach who preyed on little boys. It started one day after practice. Do you remember the first time Coach Feifel showed you a dirty picture?
Yeah, it was in his car.
On the way to the ice cream parlor, Feifel showed Richard some pictures of naked women. It was just the beginning.
It was sort of our secret, and it was something he was sharing with me, and you like this. This is pretty cool, isn't it? And then at a certain point, there was no way out.
At Feifel's home, Richard says he was shown more pictures, slides, and pornographic movies. Finally, he turned his brutal attention to Richard's body. And above all, Richard was afraid that someone, worst of all, the father he so wanted to please, would discover his secret.
One of the things that happened as a result of Feifel's abuse was that our relationship was ruptured.
A 10-year-old boy raped by his coach, became a little boy who thought he had no one to talk to, who thought he was the bad guy.
If you opened your mouth with your secret, what would the effect of that have been?
I would be seen for the horrible young pervert that I had now become.
And that is how he would think of himself for the next 30 years. No one learned Richard's secret, but people in Allentown had always whispered about Coach Feifel. Even Richard's father, himself a Little League coach, had heard the rumors and said nothing.
You would say, that guy likes to fool around with little boys. But when you said fool around, you didn't mean actual sexual overtures. You meant maybe he likes to have 6 or 8 of them in the car so he can tell them dirty jokes and stuff. It didn't register that people would be that nasty to children.
And he had no idea that this coach would rape his son. But a few people in Allentown knew that while Richard Hoffman was still in high school, Coach Feifel was actually arrested for sodomizing another young boy.
June 16th, 1967. Mr. Feifel at that time is 37 years of age.
Jerry Procanon is a police detective. His first encounter with John Feifel was no rumor. It was a matter of public record.
Mr. Feifel was charged with sodomy under the old Pennsylvania Crimes Code. The family then declined, after the arrest, to have their son testify.
But without the victim's testimony, a quiet deal was cut back in '67. As Procanon explains, Feifel was allowed a lesser plea of disorderly conduct, so the charge of sodomy was dropped, the truth along with it.
When you pay a fine of disorderly conduct in Pennsylvania, like in many other states, you can go home and tell people that you had an argument with your neighbor and that's why you were arrested. And it's the end of the story.
Whatever the legal excuse, Coach Feifel was permitted to return to coaching despite his arrest for sodomizing a child. And not surprisingly, it happened again.
I arrested Mr. Feifel back in December of 1983, and it was for involuntary sexual deviant intercourse.
That's right, John Feifel was arrested again, 16 years later, for the same crime by the same detective.
Mr. Feifel got 18 months probation.
Probation because he was regarded by the courts as a first-time offender. Remember, the earlier charge was for disorderly conduct. And while the court should have been able to review his file containing the sodomy charge, incredibly, those files had been destroyed.
The cases from the early 60s, because of space limitations, were shredded.
During the 18 months he was on probation, Feifel's record remained a secret. His victims weren't talking, and the authorities' hands were legally tied. Feifel's seemingly quiet suburban life continued on, without interruption. When probation was up, it was as if nothing had ever happened.
He had a record, but he was a free man.
The secret had been erased except from the scarred minds and hearts of Coach Feifel's victims. By this time, Richard Hoffman was a man in his 30s. He had carried the scars of his rape through high school, then college, through the death of his brother Mike in 1970 and brother Bob just 2 years later. He struggled to escape the ugly person he was convinced he had become.
I would be anybody but that kid. That was the task, was to be anybody but him.
Because that kid was weak? Powerless?
Because he was weak, he was powerless, because he was ashamed. I mean, he couldn't look anybody in the eye.
How lost did you get?
Oh, I got very lost.
Drinking?
Sure, the drinking was it's almost too simplified to say it was a way to hold the feelings at bay.
But to finally confront his demons, Richard would unleash all of his feelings in a meeting in 1990. Richard, the angry, bitter son, gave his father one last burden to carry.
Well, to be truthful, I thought my world came to an end.
In a face-to-face confrontation, Richard told his most painful stories. His father, for the first time, really listened.
He asked me whether I recalled some of the physical incidents between him and I as he was growing up.
But beyond all the family strife and childhood rage, there was the rape. Now his father would know the truth, and it made a much-feared dad tender.
I said, why didn't you come to me when it happened? And Dick's reaction was, all you would have done was beat me up.
For Richard, it was the end of a long struggle. For his father, it was just the beginning. Richard had closure. He had told his secret. He would now write it down in a memoir. But Richard's father was determined to set things right. And to do so, father and son together would take on an entire community.
There wasn't much I could do except to try to check a little bit to actually see, whether anybody else had the same story that Dick had.
What Richard and his father would find would stun an entire town. The conclusion to our story when we come back.
Coming up next, would the town of Allentown believe the father and son? Or would they say, you're making this up and we don't believe you? The conclusion of John Hockenberry's story. Stay with us. Well, you've heard about Richard Hoffman telling his father that he'd been raped several years ago by John Feifel, the Little League coach. The crime was committed years ago. And now he told his father. But what would the town think? Father and son are about to tell the whole town what had happened. As John Hockenberry reaches the conclusion of the story, you will hear what the father and son did, and you will see, and you will hear what happened when the police decided to get involved. Once again, here's John Hockenberry.
I believe in the power of books to change people. I believe in the power of writing to change people. Because
like any author, Richard Hoffman hoped his first book, a memoir called Half the House, would reach people. But the person he most wanted to reach was his father.
You liked it? Yeah, I liked the book. I did. And I took a big load off of his mind because he thought I was going to jump all over him. But I think it's a truthful book, and you can't fight very much with the truth.
The truth was a bombshell in Allentown. Hoffman's book named the man everyone called Coach Tom, John Feifel, as his abuser. And now, armed with his son's memoir, Richard Hoffman's father was determined to settle a score with the man who had hurt his boy so very long ago.
I just couldn't picture Dick had carried this secret with him for 30 or 40 years. Was he going to carry that, for the rest of his life? Or were there people out there who were going to step forward and say yes?
What father and son discovered was that Richard was not alone. Within a few weeks of the publication of Half the House, the calls started coming in.
Many of those calls were tearful. Sometimes it was 2 or 3 minutes before I got a chance to say anything.
Dozens of men, seemingly of all ages, all victims of Coach Feifel, coming forward now because of a book.
Children just came out of the woodwork to accuse him of these things.
But the most shocking part to both father and son was what neither of them could have imagined, that 40 years after Richard's abuse, John Feifel was still coaching and still abusing children in Allentown.
He said he'd never hurt us, but he did hurt us.
13-year-old Michael, molested by Feifel, would blow the whistle on this man, telling his story to the police. Michael also called Richard Hoffman. Richard remembers their first phone conversation. There were few words.
And he said, thanks. I said, okay. And he said, no, I mean, thanks for writing that book. You made it stop.
That book changed your life, didn't it?
Yeah.
How?
It made me come out and tell the truth what happened.
A book made you brave.
Yeah.
It was as though a 40-year-old story was coming alive before its author's eyes. Richard Hoffman heard from a 12-year-old the same secret he had kept for most of his life. But this time, the ending would be different. Less than 2 months after the publication of Richard Hoffman's book, police arrested a frail 68-year-old man. Astonishingly, it was the same officer who had arrested Coach Feifel twice before who took him in.
I indicated to him that it would be in his best interest that perhaps if there were other boys that he cared to tell me about, that now would be the time to do so.
Feifel confessed to everything. Inside his suburban home, police seized a museum of pornography. There were dozens and dozens of pictures, all of young boys. A startling portrait of a longtime pedophile, through the pictures of his hidden victims. But why had it taken 40 years to learn the truth?
A lot of times, if someone does know with pedophiles, it's like, let someone else go to the cops and tell them, I don't want to be the person. Let someone else. It's the proverbial, I really don't want to get involved syndrome.
A small town with a big secret. Even though there were people who knew all about John Feifel, Coach Tom, everybody called him, no one spoke out. So when he showed up here at the prestigious Mountainville Sports Association, once again the coach was brought on board. No background checks, not even a phone call.
Could someone made a call just to say, did you ever hear of a guy by the name of John Feifel? That would have set off 1,000 bells.
There are people who are threatened, very threatened by the revelations in the book. There are people who knew about this and did nothing. There are people who may have been actively complicitous with this man, and they have to be damned nervous now about what else will come out.
It all came down to 2 days in an Allentown courtroom. In the end, hundreds of people, mostly young boys, were prepared to testify against Coach Feifel. Richard couldn't tell the court what had happened to him. He was violated so long ago that the statute of limitations had run out. But for the first time in 30 years, he would be in the same room as the man who had raped him.
I was angry. I was really angry. I found myself shaken. I was in tears.
While the whole town awaited Feifel's sentence, Richard and his father understood they had come to the end of a long journey, one they had made together.
If he hadn't hung in with this, there'd be no story.
I have nothing but admiration for the way that Dick did it. I've got something to live for.
You feel like a father again?
Yeah.
Good feeling.
Sure is.
John Feifel was finally sentenced to 8 to 35 years in state prison. Richard Hoffman is now working on a second book, but he knows nothing can ever equal that first slim volume that changed so many lives.
To people who aren't writers, who don't know much about what it takes, would you rather have the Pulitzer Prize or that sentence?
All I have to do is look at one of those kids and the Pulitzer Prize shrinks pretty rapidly. For some of those boys, this stopped because the book was published and because I stuck to my guns about naming him in the book. That's wonderful.
8 to 35 means that Feifel must serve a minimum of 8 years behind bars, meaning he'd be 75 years old before he'll be eligible for parole.
Now here's my take on this. Why was he charged with probation? That was years ago. Now, my take on this, hadn't the people not confessed, he would have been in jail and not be able to coach again. First of all, if you're on probation and still doing your job, you need to have a probation officer by your side. Because if you violate your probation officer will let you know, hey, that's a violation, that's violation of your probation. Which is why we need to have probation officers. If you're on probation, then you should have a probation officer by your side. What I just really hate is when people don't understand the word probation. The definition of probation is the release of an offender from detention subject to a period of good behavior under supervision. So was he supervised? He was not supervised. He was continuing coaching. That's why there needs to be a probation officer by his side so that this doesn't happen again. So that it won't happen again. Now here's a story that you'll see coming up on Friday.
taken on the most powerful force in their lives, their own church, exposing what they say is a terrible evil.
I didn't know any better. I just remember the hurt.
Child molestation. As the Catholic Church struggles with the pedophile priest scandal, another church faces its own ugly allegations.
He's a sexual predator. When he goes door to door, he has a craving for young juvenile girls.
And how is this church responding?
We certainly never tell them not to report a case of child molestation.
But some victims who do go to the police tell John Larson they are shunned, even threatened with expulsion.
He raped me, and he's being loved.
They were robbed of their childhoods. Now they want justice. Will they find it?
That's on Friday. Then on Give Me a Break Saturday, on Saturday, the story of a man who was sentenced to jail for over a century for the use of marijuana. Who suggested marijuana in the first place? Why was he growing pot in his yard? You'll hear his side of the story along with his wife. That's on Saturday. That's Give Me a Break for this Wednesday. We'll see you again at Give Me a Break Friday. I hope you had a great day. I hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving. For all of us here at YouTube and Give Me a Break, good night and have a happy Thanksgiving.